Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cobra Day at the Petersen Automotive Museum in Los Angeles. Well, to quote Carroll Shelby, no one really gave him the idea for the Cobra, no one person or no one event. There just sort of seemed to be an old bunch of sports cars back in the 1950s, but they all had one thing in common. They were powered by those big American V8 engines, the Cadillacs and the Chryslers and the Chevys and even Buicks. But it was Carroll Shelby in the late 1950s and early 1960s that decided, hey, if we took a V8 powered sports car with that big engine and put it in something nice and light and slippery like they made in Europe, bingo, we could have something of real high performance in a lightweight and very trackable, very raceable configuration. Well, fortunately, Ford Motor Company and their small block V8 came along at just about the right time, and Shelby knew that that was the way to go. The AC was pretty okay in terms of a platform. This AC car, right from the start, sure wasn't state-of-the-art, but it was available and it was more than adequate, or at least it could be made to be adequate. Another thing that Shelby knew was that the whole ball of wax wouldn't work without the help of a major manufacturer. And here he got lucky, because he knocked on Ford's door at the right time. In fact, looking back on it now, the timing could not have been better. The Cobra today and yesterday, a very exciting car. The automotive press recognized that, and they helped focus the public's attention on it. The public knew that this was a good piece of machinery right from the get-go. And a small company full of hot rodders and ex-sprint racers at Shelby American were going after the sophisticated and moneyed Europeans. Now that's a good idea too. Think about it. They were underdogs, and people loved to root for the underdog. The Cobra captured America's imagination and gave them something to stand up and cheer about. An awful lot of talented American drivers were looking for a car like the Cobra to race besides. It helped them increase their skill because the wheel was small, the car was small, and it provided a boost to their careers. You could see them inside the cars, and they used their skill to win races. That little Cobra helped guys like Dan Gurney and Bob Bondurant, like Davey McDonald and Bob Holdert and Ken Miles, really showcase their talents. And the same was true for the guys who helped design or build or fabricate or maintain the cars. Phil Remington, Pete Brock, Al Dowd. Let's take a look. Kick back.
My amateur career started out after I went broke in the chicken business in Dallas. I'd gotten out of the Air Force. I was a pilot for 5 years. And I went into several businesses, and they just couldn't hold my attention. So after 26,000 chickens died one night, I thought to myself, I've always wanted to drive race cars. I've been playing around with MGs and Jaguars and Allards around Dallas, and in an amateur sort of way. So I decided that I would try to see if I could make a living out of it. And I got a couple of offers from people to drive professionally in an amateur sport. One, John Edgar, another one was Tony Paravana. We were racing as amateurs against Briggs Cunningham, who had unlimited funds. Jim Kimberly, Bill Spears. The Ferrari factory was sending Luigi Canetti, or he was buying them, God rest his soul, sending him the latest Ferrari equipment. So Luigi said that if I would drive Ferraris, that he would see that I got the best. And in 1956, I won a lot of races. However, really in 54, I got busted up in the Pan Americana driving for Austin Healey. That was a professional ride. In 55, Tony Paravana sent me to Europe to buy about 20 Ferraris and Maseratis. I drove my first Formula One at Syracuse. I started to go back to Europe, but I had 3 children by that time that were in school, and I decided to try to stay in the United States for a year. And I drove for John Edgar. 56 and 57, I'd go to Europe and drive a few races. And in 59, John Wire at Aston Martin offered me a job in Formula One, and they had the last they had the distinction of building the last Formula One car with an engine in front. So we weren't very successful in '59. However, I did win Le Mans, driving with Roy Salvadori, and we won the TT, and I was in both cars that won, and we won the World Championship in '59, which I guess I'm one of the few drivers that have ever competed as a driver in a World Championship team, won Le Mans, gone back and built my own car that won the World Championship, the GT Championship, and then built the Ford GTs and entered them under Shelby American that won Le Mans in '66 and '67. So I don't know who really won the World Championship in '66 because I built the cars and entered them, and Ford paid for it. So that's still up, that ball's still in the air. So if I want to advertise that I won the World Championship in '66, Ford can't, they can't give me too much lip over that. But anyway, it was a wonderful relationship. But I had to give up a lot to do that. I started All-American Racers. The chairman of Goodyear, when A.J. Foyt ran Firestone tires on one end of the car or other with a contract with Goodyear, the chairman of Goodyear says, "You got a blank check to go build some Indianapolis cars." Building the Ford GTs, building the Indianapolis cars, building the Cobras, building 10,000 Ford GTs, Shelby Mustangs a year. And the whole way to the Ford GT program, at the end of '67, which was the end of my professional career, both as I finished driving in '60, won the national championship on nitroglycerin pills, and as you know, I started building cars then. And by the end of '67, when we won Le Mans, I didn't care one end of a race car from the other.
Genuine Shelby automobiles, those powered by Ford engines and built by Shelby American in the 1960s, were meant to be driven. And most of all, to quote Peter Brock, they're meant to be shared. There really is very little value in having an automobile so perfectly restored that it cannot be driven and photographed and admired. To show you how very rare these machines are in terms of production totals, there were only 75 260 Cobras, the Mark I, 453 street cars, 29 factory team cars. Of the 5.4 billion people on Earth, only a few over 1,000 will ever have the opportunity to own a Cobra.
Well, I started shooting pictures in 1958, and they weren't very good, and it was a way of getting into the races for nothing. And when I actually got out of the Navy was when I finally took it seriously, and I started doing races at the SCCA. And that's where I met Pete, and that's how I got involved with Shelby American. So it was a fun era.
Tell us about what it was like looking at professionals and amateurs racing together back then, the differences and how you perceive them.
Well, there really wasn't any professional racing to speak of back then. I mean, it started out and there were professionals racing amateur like Carroll and Maston Gregory and Phil Hill and Dan Gurney, who were racing in Europe but would come back here and race in Cow Club events too. And Richie Ginther was among those, Chuck Day. And then USAC started their professional racing in 1958, I believe. And they were the ones to have professional road racing first. And of course, they were the ones that were behind the Times Grand Prix. And they got involved with Laguna Seca and Road America and some of the other ones. And the SCCA really didn't get involved until later on. And I think pretty much by 1963, the SCCA, came in with the USRC series, and it was away. Became the Can-Am.
Your story.
Well, really, we all started out as an amateur. I started out with a little Morgan Plus 4 up at Santa Barbara road races in 1956 in February. And ran there, and I thought, man, this is a lot of fun. It's kind of like almost driving on the streets in those days and never getting caught. And so we ran for about 6 years, 7 years in Morgan, Triumph, board and stroke Triumph, then bought a 2-liter Ferrari, then bought a Corvette and started in Corvettes. In those days we had 36 Corvettes in a race, and that was wild. Then Carroll came along and told me he's going to build this thing called a Cobra. And he's going to blow off all the Corvettes. I said, you're never going to do that. So we kept talking, and he said, I want you to drive it. So I finally said, okay. The more I got to talking to him, I more realized that he really is going to do it. He worked with Ford, got some Ford sponsorship for the first car, and got the money going. But it was supposed to be ready at a certain date. It wasn't. We missed 2 more races, 3 more races. Then Shelley Washburn called me, and I'd driven for Shelley in the Corvettes, and he said, we got a brand new Stingray, it's first coming out, and I think that was 63. And he said, would you drive it for me? And I said, okay. Well, I'd semi-retired too at that time, just prior to that. And I said, okay, I will. Well, about that time, Billy Krause came out and drove the first Cobra at Riverside and blew us all off. I think he broke a half shaft along the way, but the handwriting was on the wall. So we ran our Corvette, our Stingray, racing against Davey McDonald and Ken Miles. And I could run third, I could run with them, but I could never pass them. They would out-accelerate me and out-wreck me, but out-corner them. So eventually one day we out-qualified Davey at Pomona, and I started driving for Carroll after that. And then we went to Europe in 1964 and 65, and almost won in 65, won the World Manufacturers Championship. We were there to beat Ferrari, and that was the main deal, to win the World Manufacturers Championship. So we missed by 5 points. So we came back the next year, drove the Coupes like you see behind us here, and I was fortunate enough to win 7 of the 10 races, and we won the World Manufacturers Championship on July 4th, 1965, and it was the neatest time for me ever racing. Driving for Carroll was great. We had a fantastic team. He was great. He had raced. He understood what it was like to race and understood what it was like to build a really good, competitive car that had a good team. And it was all teamwork. And it was fabulous. And I've just become a super performance Cobra dealer. Ours are built down in South Africa. And
Well, to quote Carroll Shelby, when you get tied up with a big company, it has the tendency to change your perspective just a little bit. Getting involved with Ford was kind of like asking a big gorilla to dance. You start off leading, but before very long you're being swung all over the floor, and pretty soon you lose sight of the fact that all you really wanted to do in the first place was dance. Well, the Cobra led to the Mustang, the GT350, and that led to the GT40. But remember now, all Carroll Shelby really wanted to do was go racing.
Hi, I'm Lynn Park, and I'm co-president of the Cobra Owners Club. I'm one of these characters that living my second childhood by racing a Cobra in vintage races. I watched them race by the professionals back in the 1960s, and I thought, boy, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. It cost way too much money. I was a college kid and couldn't do it. So my second childhood came along in about 1980, and I said, this is great. And I had a Cobra, and I decided, let's make this into a race car. And vintage racing was just coming into its own, and I said, this is going to be great. I've got a fast car. I'm going to go out and win races. Well, I went out and didn't win races. As a matter of fact, my first race of any significance, I finished last. And I thought, well, that's not so bad. And I watched the professionals, and I watched how they did it. We were practicing one time at Monterey in Cobras that were very similar. Bob Bondurant drove by me in the middle of a turn. I was hanging on for everything I had, and Bob Bondurant drove by me and waved. So I said, yes, there is a difference in the drivers. It's not the car. And the more I watch those guys, they just have a way of doing it. They've got a feel that none of us amateurs can have. And until we get something given to us by God that we don't have now, we can't do it. And they're willing to take a few chances that we're not willing to take. If we see some guy coming up to a turn that wants by us and is going to go by no matter what, we give them way. Bob Bondurant or Pinelli Jones does not give them away. Makes them work for it awful hard to get by. So there's the main difference. But the main difference actually is the talent. These guys have got more talent in their proverbial little finger than the rest of us have in our whole heads. And that's what we do. Now you get a couple of amateurs like Fred Galloway, and Don Lee has just emerged as a star now. And these guys are good. They really are. Some of us have our moments. Even me, as easygoing as I am, managed to run first for a while to Monterey Historics in 1980 or 1992 or 3 or 4, whenever it was. But I was working so hard, I couldn't concentrate that much for a whole race. Those guys are working hard to do what they do.
Coming up next, we'll take a look at the car that won the World Manufacturers' Championship of Makes in 1965. That was a first for the U.S. We caught up to Craig Von Dare of the TV show Motorama. He takes a look at this spectacular machine.
In the early 1960s, when the original Shelby Cobra was introduced, it was immediately obvious that it was not only a great street car, but a very effective race car. Carroll Shelby had a dream of taking the Cobra to Europe and beating Enzo Ferrari at his own game in GT racing, one of the pinnacles of sports car competition. However, in 1963, when the Cobras began racing in Europe, it worked out that they simply were not fast enough to run with the extraordinary Ferrari 250 GTO. It became obvious to Carroll Shelby that he needed a smoother and sleeker vehicle if he was going to beat Ferrari at his own game. He hired a young designer, Pete Brock, to put some lines down on paper. That concept became known as the Cobra Aerodynamic Coupe, and the Cobra Aerodynamic Coupe eventually evolved into the Daytona. Let's take a closer look at some of those design elements that go into making the Cobra Daytona Coupe so special. Now, the front end of the vehicle is not unusual for GT racers of that era, but notice you have a particularly acute angle right here at the front of the hood. That was made possible by laying forward the radiator. That allows you to have this nice sloping hood line. Then they cut a relief here in the hood to exhaust that hot air smoothly over the top of the vehicle. Here, near the base of the windshield, they cut an opening in the hood, and this allows high-pressure air coming off the windscreen to go down into the carburetors, creating what's called a ram air effect for more horsepower. Now, moving up over the windscreen, we see that it makes a smooth but determined brake with the angle of the windscreen and the angle of the roof. If we move back even a little bit further, we see this quarter window. This quarter window has an extra plastic panel added to it to suck in cold air and direct it down to the rear brake rotors. Now take a look at the roofline of this vehicle. One of Pete Brock's design innovations was to come up with a concept called 7 degrees from horizontal. The slope of the roof does not go more than 7 degrees from a straight horizontal line. The reason this is important is because if you go more than 7 degrees from horizontal, the airflow separates or delaminates from the surface of the car. That causes turbulence, and turbulence is like a giant hand that presses down on the car and makes it run slower. But it's here at the very rear of the vehicle where the radical aerodynamics begin to take shape. This is called a cam tail. That's K-A-M-M. It's named after an obscure German scientist, but the principle here is a brilliant one. The actual rear of the automobile tapers down to an imaginary point back here in space. And that's where the airflow from the top and the bottom of the car would join up. But by using this cam tail and cutting off the vehicle cleanly, like you would slice a loaf of French bread, you get to make the car some 3 to 4 feet shorter. In racing, that's important because it means less bulk and less weight. That's one of the tricks, the secrets that the Cobra Daytona Coupe used to beat Ferrari at his own game. It's now 1964. Carroll Shelby has his ultimate weapon, the Daytona Coupe, and he's racing in Europe against Ferrari. The Daytona wins some races and the Ferraris win some races. The season moves on. It comes down to the final 3 races: Monza, Bridgehampton, and the Tour de France. Now, it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that Ferrari is going to win the Tour de France because they've always dominated this multi-day, multi-stage race. It's a logistics nightmare, and the Cobras have never done this before. But it's also a foregone conclusion that the Cobras are going to win Bridgehampton. It's a course ideally suited to the strengths of the Daytona. That makes Monza the determining race of the season. But Enzo Ferrari's a clever man, He knows that races are won not only on the tear-stained blacktop of the race course itself, but in the smoke-filled back rooms of racing politics. When the FIA refuses to certify or homologate Ferrari's LM prototype, he convinces the Monza organizers to cancel the race. No matter what happens, if you do the math, it means that the Ferraris have once again won the GT championship. Shelby's disheartened, but he gets more money from Ford and comes back in 1965. This is the championship year for him. Ferrari knows he's beaten and actually withdraws from GT racing. And then, on July 4th of 1965, the Cobra Daytonas chalk up enough points to win the GT championship, the first time an American race car has ever done so. We're talking with the one and only Carroll Shelby. Mr. Shelby, we're here today to celebrate your great Cobra cars, but I've been talking about the Dodge Viper, and I'd like to know what your input was to the original Viper.
Well, the original Viper, the first one, we started building here in California. John Fernandez, who is now in charge of the Viper program, and I started building it in 1987. And at the time, I had a very serious heart problem, and I knew I was going to have a transplant. We transferred the program back to Detroit, and Bob Lutz put a team of guys together to build a modern Cobra, Cobra for the 90s. And the outcome of it was the Viper. And now, as we see, the Viper, it's transforming into, let's call it a automobile with a few more comforts in it. The
Really?
Roadster now will have power windows and so on and so forth. The Coupe is a derivative, you might say, of the Daytona Coupe, which you know, still is the only car that ever won the world championship, only American car. I don't know why an American manufacturer hasn't built a car that's capable of winning it, but maybe the Viper will come along and accomplish that. I hope so. But right in the middle of the program, I had to get out of it and come to Cedars-Sinai out here and have a heart transplant. So I didn't have a hell of a lot to do with it. The only thing I had to do with it really is keep yelling, get the weight down, keep the weight down, because I really believe that you've got to have a car that's really competitive at Le Mans or any of those places. You have to have a car that has the weight down. They've got the weight down on the Viper, the GTS that's running a GTS 2 now. They got that weight down fairly close, and I'm sure that the future Vipers will be even lighter than that with all the titanium and things that are available now. But the Viper, what I'm proud of the Viper for is because it turned the image of the Chrysler Corporation down. Nobody ever thought that another corporation in America, besides General Motors, they had the Corvette for years, maybe not made any money, but a lot of the people in Detroit, especially Lee Iacocca, didn't particularly want to do it because most people don't know it, but Iacocca's a finance man. He's considered a salesman by some people. He was trained as an engineer, but we were moving into a recession. It was a very deep recession, and Chrysler didn't know whether they were going to make it or not. And I'll always admire Iacocca. My job really in the Viper program, the most important part that I played was sit down and babysitting him every day, every week to see that he didn't cut the budget off.
Understood.
And after we got it so far, it was far enough along that it wouldn't have made sense to cut it off. So that was I guess my greatest contribution.
Well, of course, you mentioned keeping the weight down on the car, and that is a critical element, especially in motorsports and even more especially in endurance racing. And one of the secrets of the original Cobra was its phenomenal power-to-weight ratio.
Right.
Well, we've talked about the Cobra Daytona. How did it feel for you personally in 1965 when you beat Ferrari and won that GT championship?
It was probably the most exciting thing that ever happened. Of course, we should have beat him at 64. He got the last race of the year canceled on the one racetrack that we would have beat the hell out of him. But when we won it in 65, it was probably the greatest day of my life up till that time. And I still don't understand why an American manufacturer has not gone to the trouble of building something. We could. It would be very simple to go win Le Mans again. If you take the attitude that Henry Ford did in 1965, when all of our studs in our and stud bolts in our cylinder heads stretched, he called Don Fry in his office and he says, "We're going to win Le Mans next year, aren't we?" And we said, "We'd like to, sir." And we walked out of his office, and Don Fry walked back in and said, "Mr. Ford, you didn't mention any financial restrictions." He said, "No, I didn't, did I?" He said, "Let's go win Le Mans." So we spent a lot of money, but I think that's the thing that turned the Ford Motor Company around, the image, us taking the GTs and beating Ferrari at Le Mans, the Cobras beating Ferrari, and then at Chrysler when we built the Viper. I think that's the thing that turned the whole image of the company around and made it helped make it the successful company it is today.
And
I'd like to see next year have a bunch of Vipers around here with these Cobras.
That'd be pretty
they're all
nice.
Cousins.
To quote Peter Brock, if you aren't really driving that piece of history you call your Shelby or your Cobra, you'll never really fully understand what these cars are all about. So if that's the case, just get rid of it. Let it go to someone who will drive it. And in so doing, will share the experience with others, people that they live with, people that they will love and love to share the experience with. So in truth, think about it. You never really own a Cobra or a Shelby. Somehow, if you're fortunate enough to possess one for a while, you'll live with it, and you'll remember some of the best years of your life. And you'll understand the rare opportunity of being able to care for it and share it with your friends. History proves that much of what we think we really value is only fashion. And this good old boy from Leesburg, Texas, really understood that more than anyone else. The genuine Shelby automobiles, powered by Ford Motor Company, and created by a bigger-than-life, by-God Texan named Carroll Shelby. The Shelby American Automobile Club, through its members, strives to provide an accurate living history of every real Shelby automobile ever produced. And Carroll Shelby himself takes the money that he makes with his signatures and the groups that meet with him, and he provides those funds to the Shelby Heart Fund. He, having a heart transplant himself, could easily be the poster boy, but he doesn't do that. He simply offers up his signature and provides help to indigent children who need heart transplants. Everyone at the Petersen today is providing funds for these fine young children. Next up, another socially conscious man in the automotive aftermarket business, a man who creates horsepower by offering a wide range of engine breathing apparatus. Here is Vic Edelbrock of Edelbrock Corporation.
Here with Alan Bowtie. And Alan's question is quite unique to me as an amateur race car driver, which I am very much, and the difference between that and the professional type. Although I have never been a professional type race car driver, but the amateur part that I'm involved in is vintage car racing, and to me it's the ultimate. I've never really had so much fun doing things around my cars. I have 5 cars in my camp. My 2 oldest daughters drive 2 Shelbys, and I have a '63 Corvette split window that I started off with. It goes back to Bob Bondurant driving it for Washburn Chevrolet, and it was one of the first Z06s, so it's a little famous. And then I have a custom body Lister that was built in 1959 with a Chevrolet engine in it that we completely brought back to life. And the one we just got that's infamous, not famous, is Smokey Unix 1968 Trans Am Camaro. and that's a real blast, and that's the first time I've really had a chance to drive a race car, because that is a race car. But the amateur part of it, and vintage car racing especially, is really, really fun. Great people that you're with and you're running with, and of course everything evolves around the 13-13 rule, so it keeps people honest and makes people aware of not running into somebody or doing something stupid. And you're not running for points, and you're not running for championships or trophies or money, and you go out and you have a good time. If you run last place, you pick a guy that's running second to last, and you dice with him and have fun, and you come off and you've had a really great day. So we're really excited in it. The professional part of it, you know, a driver is under the pressure of he's got to win. He's there to win. If he's got a sponsor, then he's got to do something for his sponsor, or he may not have it the next year. And to me, there'd be a whole different ball game, and a lot of pressure on that side, which is definitely not on the amateur side. However, if I was back in my younger day again, I'm sure I would have liked to have been a professional. And in fact, I wanted to be. And when I outgrew my dad's midget when I was 13 years old, was one of the happiest days of his life, because he then realized that I was going to be a midget race car driver. But I, in those days, was definitely pushing him to do something, and he always turned me off and said that, you know, the name is made and don't go out and screw it up or whatever. So I never got that opportunity. But for the guys, the young guys that are out there professional-wise, you know, the guys at NASCAR and all that, they have a lot of fun, but it's just got a different veil around the whole thing. Vintage car racing is really a lot of fun, and you know, an event like this, to come out here with your Cobras and stuff and do your thing, that's just the capper on the top of the cake.
My sister and I both race Shelbys, and it is kind of rare to see the women in the field, especially in our group with all the big muscle cars, all the V8s. It's really exciting. I started first, and then she came in after me, so I kind of, you know, showed her how to do it, and we really have a lot of fun. It's you know, on the grid with all the guys, talking before the race and trying to get tips and see how they do it. You know, it's really neat.
I'm Mike Eisenberg, and I'm owner and operator of Mako Motorsports. We are the premier builder of Shelby GT350 vintage race cars. We have over a dozen cars we support at the racetrack, and all our customers are having a great time reliving their youth watching amateur road racing. My experience with road racing really started out with open track events with Cobra Club. Cobra Club has been involved in high-speed track activities for over 20 years, and I started over 10 years ago with a Cobra replica, and then I moved into a Shelby GT350. And it was so much fun going out to the racetrack and being with your buddies and having a good time learning to drive fast that the next step up was vintage racing. And about 6 years ago, in 1990, I started vintage racing and have grown steadily to the point where we've attracted a following of customers who are coming to the races with us and racing their cars. I chose the Shelby GT350 because the heritage is that of a race car. The car's a unibody. It's easy to stiffen them up enough to make them handle. The Ford 289 motor is a dynamite power plant to get great horsepower out of. And frankly, the Ford motor will beat a Jaguar motor. The Shelbys have no trouble beating Jaguars. And while the Corvettes may have more horsepower, the Shelby will outhandle a Corvette 10 ways to Sunday, and they usually do.
Here we are at the Petersen Museum, folks. This is the second of two very significant moments for Carroll Shelby. Carroll Shelby, who unfortunately had a death in the family just 2 months ago, is for the first time back out in public and enjoying the accolades of which is his very long and very enduring career creating American sports cars, cars that well, in our parlance, were the ground pounders of the big V8s that he turned into sports cars. Let's take a look at one of them. Behind me is one of the very rare R model Shelbys. R for race. Of the 562 cars made in 1965, this is one of only 36 that was designed to race on race courses only. What that means is, for the first time in the world, in the first time in the business of selling cars, you could buy a race car that you couldn't drive off the lot. You bought it off the dealer's showroom floor, and you put it on a trailer, and you took it to the racetrack. Now, this affected the Corvette drivers significantly. This affected the Jaguar drivers significantly, as they were the reigning champions in B production, which was one of the top classes of the big, fast cars in the Sports Car Club of America. The R model Shelby, with 306 horsepower in stock form, it had 350 horsepower. It weighed about 2,740 pounds. It had a 4-speed Sebring gearbox, which meant it had close ratios. It was made out of aluminum. The car was capable of 0 to 60 in about 5.6 seconds with a top speed of 172 miles an hour. That's significant. At Daytona in 1966, with an R model Shelby racing against the cars that Shelby had also built called the Cobra, we saw the Shelbys with their little fastback going faster in terms of top speed than his little purpose-built aluminum alloy 2,000-pound cars. How so? Let's take a look at the back of the car. A coupe is about 45 inches high. This is a Ford Mustang built in 1964 and in 65 and then again in 66. But with this height, the car created at 100 miles an hour a turbulent, reverse tumbling pillow of air that went 25 feet in the air at 100 miles an hour, caused by the air coming up over the windshield, so that this mass of 20-foot-high air, a mass of air 25 feet high, would be rolling along at 100 miles an hour. Solution: Shelby took the back glass out of the car. He dropped it about 2 inches so that the air inside of the car came through and out. It created laminar flow, or a low pressure area. So what was 20 feet high in terms of a turbulating mass of air became 45 inches high and very sleek. It was a low silhouette, and it created a better aerodynamic moment than the little Cobra, which was, by many people's standards, had the aerodynamic qualities of a brick. Therefore, the GT350R model, highly successful, in 1965 won the SCCA B Production Championship. Did it again in 1966, and again, the car was 3 years old, but in 1967, the GT350R model won again, the national champion, putting the Corvettes and the Jaguars and the Sunbeam Tigers back on the trailer.
I'm mixed professional and amateurism back when it was an amateur sport here. There were a few of us that were professionals in an amateur sport. The NCAA, boy, I'm glad they didn't find out about that, because thank God they didn't have any jurisdiction over us.
How about some of the differences? Obviously, you really raise the bar when you do it for money.
Well, even as a professional in Europe during the 50s, there was a lot more camaraderie than there is now, for the simple reason that the stakes are so high now. There's so much greed in it. It's like the Indy cart versus that pure. You can understand it. I can understand it. It's a matter of greed. It's a matter of the money. And when so much money is in the thing, there's going to be a lot of awful greedy people trying to get more than their share of it. And that's the way race driving has gotten today, professional versus amateur. Fangio was the best that there was in Grand Prix cars during my day. He used to take young guys, Phil Hill, Dan Gurney, myself, other people from any country. When we go to the Nürburgring or when we go anywhere, he'd say, hey, tuck in behind me. Let me show you the way around here. You'd never get any more of those mullets now that make $25 million a year to show you the way around, and they'd come nearer taking you to the moon than they would helping you. But that's the difference between professional and amateurism. Thank God I lived today, but thank God I lived in it when there really wasn't that much difference. Fangio won the world championship 5 times, and I've been told by everybody that he drove for, no, Ferrari never told me this, he never, ever asked for X amount of dollars. When they asked him to drive for him, he said, well, I will drive for you this year. And they'll say, well, how much money do you want? Just pay me whatever you think it's worth. You don't see that anymore. They've got managers, they've got PR people, they got their own jets, they've got it's a whole different world. So you can't. It's like comparing apples and oranges.
How about this is a little nosy, but did you ever make a reasonable paycheck yourself, or was it so much money so small that it was?
Oh, I probably averaged $100,000 a year in the late 50s.
Word of the single car accident that took the life of Lena Shelby in East Texas on May 1st, 1997 came as a shock to all of us. She and Carroll were spending some time on their ranch, and she was on her way to visit her brand new colt, which had been born on her birthday. She lost control of her Jeep Cherokee on a sharp curve and the sun in her eyes as she exited the turn. It left the road and rolled over several times. Lena was born in Stockholm, Sweden. She first met Carroll back in the 1960s, and they were married in August of 1991. Besides raising miniature horses on their Texas ranch, Lena was very active with the Carroll Shelby Children's Foundation. On behalf of all SAC members, we extend our sincerest condolences to Carroll Shelby for this heartbreaking loss.
No, we actually met at good friends down in San Diego. Carroll had a big chili cook-off, one of the first ones. I think it was like the second or third one. And we were a lot of people, and there was cockfights and all kinds of funny things going on. But we're celebrating Pete Brock's new book on the Daytona Coupe that just came out, so they're having a book signing session. And all the men, Bob Bondurant is there, and they're all there signing. Carroll Shelby, my husband, is too. Being together with Carroll for a long time and being married for him the past 5 years, it's an exciting life. He's a funny man, he's dynamic, no day is the same, and you never know what to expect. He's very much a Texan, and he has a great sense of humor, and I just love it. I wouldn't have it another way.